Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center and Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org. Edina Eye Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years now in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services and dedicated specialists committed to excellence with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Access to Democracy. I'm your host today, Steve Francisco. It's a real pleasure to welcome to our studio today a brand new guest making his first appearance on our program, Ron Goldser. Welcome to Access to Democracy. Ron is also the author of a book which we're going to be talking about today called No Small Coincidence, How Yale Alumni Made History in Minnesota. Ron is also a community activist, active in politics and community affairs. And so, Ron, welcome to our show today.
Steve, it's a real joy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
My pleasure. So, you're not originally from Minnesota, as I understand it. You grew up somewhere else. Tell us briefly about that.
I grew up in Reading, Pennsylvania, Reading like the railroad on the Monopoly board. Went off to Yale, which is the genesis of my book.
For your undergraduate education.
For my undergraduate education. Spring of freshman year, I met my then girlfriend, now wife, a long time ago. We hit 47 years in a couple of days.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And she, when we graduated, she said, I'm going home, bud. You can come with me or not. So I've been here since 1975, and that's how I ended up at the University of Minnesota Law School.
A place which both of us have that in common. Both of us are graduates of that great institution.
Indeed,
so,
we have stories to share about our professors, don't we?
We do indeed. We have had some of the same professors. You were a couple of years ahead of me, class of 78.
78.
And I'm in the class of 1981. So let's talk about your book here, No Small Coincidence, about the connections between Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, and our great state of Minnesota. Tell us, why did you write this book and what's it about?
Well, first, I'm really flattered that you chose to lead off with this. My book has not gotten that much attention, probably ever. It was a labor of love because one of our alums, Malcolm McDonald, is very senior at this point, although still quite with us. I talk to Malcolm regularly. He's the kind of guy that if you tell him the name of somebody in your family, he will tell you about the rest of your family. I wanted to make sure that all of Malcolm's stories and knowledge and contacts got written down and got preserved. And that was how it started. And then it just kind of morphed into other things. There's a long set of bios that were available from the alumni office, all PDF that I could download, and I did. And at that point, I was able to do a word search for Minnesota to find all of the alums who had some relation to Minnesota, and it went back to 1840. We had a missionary come out working with local Native American communities.
Bishop Whipple?
No, you know what?
He's later, yeah.
Yeah, as I said, I've forgotten more than I've written. I don't remember who it was. But one of the things that's transpired since this book is, while there's a lot of wonderful stuff, it really emphasizes the people who connected with Minnesota from Yale. Minnesota's a Yankee state, as you and I talked about before we started taping today.
Meaning, let's just explain that for a moment. The people who came here and settled, other than the Native Americans who had been here for centuries, the Lakota people and Ojibwe people, we're talking about white American settlers who came from New England. Many of them came from New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Connecticut.
Right. And so there were many Yale people who came out. They were white and they were male. And so many of our educational institutions, particularly so many of our elite institutions, are facing the diversity challenge these days. Harvard's been sued. I think Yale's been sued over diversity. I know that when I was there was a strong effort already to get more involvement with Asian American studies, African American studies, women's studies. I thought we had done a pretty good job, but hardly good enough in light of current events and current philosophies. So the early folks who helped settle Minnesota were white guys, but that's no longer true. We have so many women, we have so many people of color from Yale who have settled here and done amazing things here to develop Minnesota further, that it's really wonderful to emphasize those. But thinking back to that missionary, I would love to go revisit so many things in this book and rewrite them from a different perspective. I wrote that part as I remember it from the perspective of the guy who came from New England here and worked with the Native Americans. I'd love to write that from the Native American perspective.
Some of the people that you talk about in this book, I understand, are names that Minnesotans who have any sense of Minnesota history, they're going to recognize names like Crosby of the Milling family fortunes. The McMillan family, which is behind Cargill. The Dayton family, which everyone in Minnesota knows who the Daytons are, and a long line up to and including former U.S. Senator and Governor of Minnesota, Mark Dayton.
Right. Clint Morrison was an high-up executive in then First Bank, the U.S. Bank.
And we should mention, we can't forget Amy Klobuchar, who was a Yale graduate.
Of course.
U.S. Senator.
Wheelock Whitney, who was responsible, I think, for the Vikings. There's a wonderful story about Senator Klobuchar when she went out to New Haven in the fall of her freshman year. She didn't travel alone. She went by car, and she went with now U.S. Magistrate Judge Tony Leung, and they drove together, and the car broke down. And
but they must have fixed it somewhere along the way because she made it and got a degree.
If you ask Tony what happened, he'll tell you who got there first. If you ask Amy what happened, she'll tell you
Maybe
the other person got
different
there first.
Recollections of who got to Yale first.
Absolutely. Yeah. So they have a lot of fun with that story. But Tony's in the book, and he's won awards as an Asian American rising in the ranks of judgeships. And a wonderful man. Wonderful man.
What do you think is behind this Yale-Minnesota connection, though? What are the roots of it? It seems to be, and correct me if I'm mistaken about this, it seems there's a strong sense of community activism, community engagement of the people who are Yale alums who have come to Minnesota, that they wanted to give back to Minnesota to make it a better place.
Well, they certainly did, but it started with wealth, not surprisingly. There's an awful lot of history in the Minneapolis Club in the early 1880s. I think the Minneapolis Club was formed in like 1883. There were an awful lot of Yale people who formed the Minneapolis Club. The Minnesota Club in St. Paul was formed at about the same time. An awful lot of Yale people who started the Minnesota Club in St. Paul. And as they were having their business discussions, they also started with their philanthropic discussions. So those two things developed side by side.
And so this really links up to something that's very essential to Minnesota's modern character. This is the home of tremendous philanthropy here. We're talking about the Cargill Foundation, the McKnight Foundation, other foundations here, the Northwest Area Foundation. I realize not all those were Yale alums, but there's been this constant in Minnesota history up to the modern time of great involvement of wealthy benefactors who have contributed to philanthropy, and certainly these Yale alum that you write about are part of that story too.
Sure. The Grotto Foundation, Malcolm McDonald was heavily involved with them. The McNeelys, who were involved with the Space Center Company, have a great involvement. I forgot the name of their foundation, but they were heavily involved in developing St. Thomas University. So there's a strong Yale theme at St. Thomas.
Another premier educational institution in our state.
Yeah, absolutely. As we were talking about before, the Art Institute, the Morrison family owned the land.
Right.
Initially donated it to the Minneapolis Institute of Art.
Right.
I don't know how they got it from the Native Americans, but I believe that to be the case. But ultimately, they donated it to the Art Institute.
So if one is interested in getting this book, how can they get the book? Let's get the book plug in here right now.
It's called No Small Coincidence. There's a website called nosmallcoincidence.com. You'll find some discussions of the book and also how to order it.
Very good.
Thank you so much for plugging it.
Our pleasure. As I said to you, we like plugging books and authors, especially when they're telling stories about Minnesota history.
Yeah.
And really current events too, related to current events.
And there's one fun story, if I could just interject for just a second. I remember we had Mark Dayton, when he was governor, as one of our guests at a luncheon event. And I had the privilege of introducing him that day, and I sat at the head table, and Malcolm was there. Mark's father, Bruce Dayton, was there. It was his 90th birthday. Wheelock Whitney was at the table, and it was going to be his 90th birthday. And boy, what a powerhouse group to have the privilege of sitting with. And of course, we sang Happy Birthday to Bruce, and Mark was singing, and real, genuine human beings as well as community
Special
leaders.
moment.
Really
so
was.
After Yale, moving on from the book if we could, you came to Minnesota, as you mentioned, following your wife.
Right.
Yeah, then girlfriend.
Then girlfriend.
Yeah, and ended up enrolling at the University of Minnesota Law School. Why did you want to become a lawyer?
You know, I've had
Were there lawyers in the family, or what was it about law that drew your attention?
It was really the social activist part. I have no idea other than that. I went back and looked at my junior high school yearbook, and where it says what you want to be when you grow up, lawyer. High school yearbook, lawyer. I have no idea. It had to have been social activism, and I suppose because I couldn't stand the sight of blood, I didn't go to medical school. But no, we didn't have any lawyers in the family. My father had a sporting goods store, a mom and pop shop. So when I hear in today's economy about mom and pop shops, that
Concerns you.
it concerns me. I'm thrilled when they are surviving. I'm dismayed when they are taken out by big box stores. We'll talk about a big box store in a little bit. But they did that. And the newspaper, when my dad retired, and he had one employee, my mom, did a feature on them. And there's this wonderful picture of him holding a shotgun because he sold guns. He had a pawn shop on the side. He sold rifles. He sold handguns. I worked there a little bit. I sold rifles. I sold handguns. We had to fill out registration with name and address. I don't recall there being background checks at that time. And in fact, little known fact, I was a member of the National Rifle Association when I was an early teenager.
My goodness.
And it was about gun safety at that time.
Right.
I have tried to find my little thing. I can't find it anymore, but I would love to walk around with my NRA patch.
You know, that's a really interesting point. As you and I have discussed, we recently did a program with my co-host Alan Miller about the gun issue and the epidemic of mass shootings that sadly we're witnessing in our country. And I don't really want to get into that today, but I want to say something about the NRA. When I worked on Capitol Hill years ago, we're talking the 80s and 90s, the NRA was seen as an educational institution primarily. It was about gun safety.
Yeah.
But they really lost a lot of membership when they came out against a ban on so-called cop killer bullets. We're talking about bullets that could penetrate the Teflon life vests that the bulletproof vests that police officers were wearing. And then they went off on a whole political rant basically against any forms of gun control, even the most reasonable regulations that are supported by 80-90% of the American people. So the organization changed over some time, and I suspect we may not have as fond a memory or as fond an attitude toward them today as we did perhaps back then. Let's talk again about your legal career. You became a trial lawyer, Ron. Share with us, if you would, what did you learn from being a trial lawyer? And if you want to share an anecdote or two about a particular case, no specific mention of cases, but just generally How was it being a trial lawyer?
Sure. Well, my career really had two parts. The first half, I was engaged in family law. So I did divorce issues, custody issues, support issues, property division, one-on-one, helping individual families. Again, part of the social activist theme, trying to help people move on into the next part of their lives, and certainly keep good relationships with their children, wherever that was possible.
Right.
And there was an awful lot of in-court work there. I was in court so much I felt like I should get a little cot and put it in one of the offices. I mean, I was there virtually every day. But then, as our firm developed, plug Zimmerman Reed, Bucky Zimmerman, Barry Reed, we started as a collective of individuals with that kind of practice, and it kind of morphed into class action work, strip search litigation. Was really where it started, some shareholder litigation, and Bucky and Barry were doing that, and they started doing well. So I finally transitioned my practice into more class action type of stuff, doing some consumer stuff. And then ultimately, I finished my career in the last 10, 12 years working in what's called mass tort. Products liability, representing patients against companies that made medical devices and pharmaceuticals. So that's really where things got big for me. And by big, I mean nationwide litigation, cases that attracted lawyers and clients and plaintiffs from all over the country. Those cases were often then centered in some court somewhere. Minnesota federal court became a locus for many of those cases. Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia. One of them was out in Wyoming. But we had a number of cases that were headquartered here. The judges here did a marvelous job with them.
When we say medical devices too, just to draw that out a little further, are we talking about things like the Dawkins Shield, breast implants, things such as this that proved effective?
Yes.
And also, we've heard a lot of talk in recent years from politicians about so-called tort reform. But when you really look at that, people may listen to that initially and think, oh, that's good, those lawyers are making too much money off cases. Nobody works for free, and these cases take a tremendous amount of time to work and to defend people and to, pursue these cases, civil cases. But what I've discovered is a lot of times tort reform, what they're really talking about is curtailing consumers' rights to pursue remedies.
The best example that comes immediately to mind is a medical malpractice reform in Nebraska. There was a family, mom was pregnant with twins. It was known fairly early on that one of them was going to have difficulty. They gave birth to both of the children, but one of them had severe disabilities. And there was a medical malpractice issue associated with it. I don't remember what it was, but apparently that was true. And there were limitations on the damages that one could recover in medical malpractice, $1 million. Well, this child was going to need services for his entire life. $1 million was not going to come anywhere close to cutting it. So what do? You either have insurance to cover that, or if there's not enough insurance, where do you go? You go to medical assistance at the state, and the government's going to cover it.
Which means all of us covering it.
All of us.
Yeah.
So spread the risk through insurance, spread the risk through taxes. You end up in the same spot. Tort reform doesn't help that child. In fact, it hinders that child, hurts that child, and maybe hurts all the taxpayers while we're at it. So that's one real poignant example of tort reform.
Right. You describe yourself on your LinkedIn page. I kind of laughed about this, but we're going to flesh it out. You call yourself a political hack, which I think people might hear that term and it has kind of a pejorative term, but I actually read it and I think I have a sense of what you're talking about because as I'm coming to know you, really what it means is you care about your community. You're politically active. You happen to be partisan. You're active in the DFL party here. You were the host of a podcast called Coffee and Conversation for Senate District 52 here in Eagan.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about how you got into that activism and what your podcast is about.
Sure. I use the term political hack, certainly tongue-in-cheek.
Right.
Never thought it would be broadcast on television anywhere, that anybody would ever see it.
Forgive me for bringing
it.
But it is on your LinkedIn page.
It is. Yeah, mea culpa.
Fair
you got
game.
My book, you got my political hack, I don't know.
We do our homework, Ron.
Yes, you do. The Coffee and Conversation started with just a small group of people meeting in the coffee shop at Byerly's Egan. And we had 10, 12 people because that's all we could fit into the coffee shop. And we just gathered some tables around and we would have nice conversations. I remember vividly we had an immigration lawyer come in one day. We were talking about the immigration issues. I think Paul Anderson came to that
Former Minnesota Supreme Court Justice.
Yes.
And one of our occasional guest hosts.
Exactly, that's why I mentioned him. And then when COVID hit, we couldn't do it anymore, so we went to Zoom. And by golly, it's really expanded. Now, I don't have a following of any great consequence, but we get 20, 30, 50 people once a month, the second Saturday of
But it's
every
a way
month.
to engage people to talk about current issues that affect the community.
Absolutely, and it's a question and answer to a great extent. We give room for people to ask questions. It also gave us the opportunity to bring in guests that didn't have to travel to the Byerly's coffee shop. And so I've had several national people. My two favorites, Sten Vermund, who was then the Dean of the School of Public Health at Yale. And right at the beginning of COVID, we were talking about what COVID meant and what the significance of public health was in that context. Pretty fascinating conversation. And then I also had a classmate of mine, a guy named Chris Whipple. Some people might recognize him. Journalist, has written a couple of books. One was on the history of chiefs of staff for presidents back to Nixon and H.R. Haldeman. And the second one was the heads of the CIA over time. And I had him on coincidentally at the time that his CIA book was coming out, so I think he wanted to do a little promotion of his book. But again, fascinating discussions.
Very interesting. And people can find this again on the web.
It's
Senate District 52 website, DFL.
Sure. DFL52.org/videos. We have the history of them. I had Angie Craig on this past Saturday talking about inflation and how it affects political candidacies in the coming election.
Certainly an issue on the top of voters' minds as we get ready to go to the polls in November. And with much at stake, literally control of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate is at stake.
Sure. As you and I were talking, it's important to recognize how well we've done in the economy.
Right.
But it's just as, and perhaps more important, to recognize that there's a real big issue that people are facing, and that's inflation. And things are being done about it, and the Dems are not doing a very good job of that.
They need to do a better job at telling the story, but they need to do a good job of listening to how this inflation, especially gas prices and other things, are hurting people. So that's very interesting. I want to switch gears. We only have about 5 minutes left, and we can't let you get out of here without talking about another interest of yours. You are, as we describe you in our little factoids on the show, a wine aficionado. And you are, now that you're retired from law, you're not practicing law anymore, but you are working at Total Wine here in Egan because of your love of wine and the wine culture. Tell us, what drew your interest in wine?
Drinking.
That's the most direct answer that's ever been given on this program.
I don't know. I ended up at Total. You know, there's this image of the guys who retire and they go over to the Home Depot or the Menards and they get their green apron, and that's what I'm doing. Only I'm doing
at a
it
wine
at a
store.
Wine store. And I've developed knowledge from trying a lot of things from travel. I did take a good chunk of the sommelier program. I didn't go all the way because I have a smelling problem. I don't smell very well, so blind tasting would be beyond me. But I know a fair amount about particularly European Old World wines. I'm going to have fun teaching a class at Total June 29th on new wines from the Old World, and July 13th will be France. So that'll be a lot of fun.
And this will be at Total Wine.
This will be at Total.
People can look at the website for further information on that.
Yeah, there's still a couple seats left for June, and we haven't really promoted the July one yet.
I want to share with you a story I saw in the news recently, and perhaps you saw it too. I believe it was on CBS Sunday Morning. They did a story from France where, because of climate change, it's literally changing the wine culture of one of the most famous wine countries in the world. We've both been to France. I'm actually going again with my wife in September. But what is happening with climate change, they're saying as the climate warms up in France and in Europe, wines that formerly were able to be produced there, they're having to go farther north to cooler climates that are more suitable for those types of grapes.
Right.
And what's happening is you're seeing a wine industry developing in the United Kingdom,
Right.
where there are wines that formerly were grown in France or even in Spain and Portugal that are now viable in these more northerly climates because of climate change. This is a real big danger for the wine industry, isn't it? Not just in Europe, but certainly in the United States. Napa Valley, we've seen horrible fires that have occurred there and other problems triggered by climate change.
You're absolutely right. The one thing that I've noticed in particular in Bordeaux, Bordeaux wines have traditionally been a blend of up to 5 grapes, but the 2 big ones are Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot.
Right.
And the ones that were more heavily Cabernet Sauvignon are now switching to more heavily Merlot. I think, if I have this right, Merlot is a little easier to grow in warmer climates. And so, particularly on the right bank, the Saint-Emilion, the Pomerol, they're increasingly Merlot. 85%, I'm picturing this one bottle, is 85% Merlot and 15% either Cab Sauv or maybe Cab Franc. That's a lot of Merlot, where it used to be Cabernet Sauvignon. And I attribute that to climate change. Nobody's told me that, but that's my surmise.
And we should be very clear, some of the side effects of this too are going to be things such as affecting tourism, affecting other businesses and jobs that depend upon the wine industry.
No
So, you know, climate change, there are so many dimensions to it. I mean, as we're seeing sadly right now, record flooding in Yellowstone National Park. The park is closed. But the effect of this on our wine industry in other places as well.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Well, Ron, you are a most interesting person, and I should tell interviewers, or our guests rather, that we hope to have you on our program in the future as an occasional guest host on the show too.
Well, that will be fun and fit right in with coffee and conversation.
Yeah, I think obviously you have experience in this field, having that podcast that you do too. But congratulations on your book. I know you didn't expect us to talk about the book today, but I would note that you did come carrying the book. So like a good lawyer, you arrived prepared today.
I did.
And we appreciate that and look forward to seeing you doing some interviews on our program in the future. Any last words you want to share with the audience as they get to know you?
I'm grateful for this show. I'm grateful that you bring on the people that you do. My political activism is consistent with the desire to get these issues explained to the public. And you do that, and I hope to have the opportunity to do some of that myself.
And of course, gratitude to our founder, Alan Miller, who started this show and has been doing it for 24 years. So great to have you on. Ron Goldser, community activist and wine aficionado.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Thank you for joining us.
I appreciate it very much.